Once upon a time, there was a China-bashing U.S. presidential candidate. A year and a day later, Donald J. Trump feted in Beijing, where he blamed trade imbalances on his predecessors, steering clear of human rights complaints and only really applying pressure on his hosts over North Korea. How much has Trump changed his tune? Trump coming off Election Day setbacks a couple of days back in the United States, hosted by a Xi Jinping, bolstered by a Communist Party Congress that cemented his position as China's most powerful ruler since Mao. The two leaders announcing more than $250 billion worth of business deals, everything from Boeing aircraft to computer chips. Just how interdependent are the world's largest two economies? What's the real balance of power when it comes to trade? Trump still does bilateral agreements, but his next stop on his 10-day regional tour, the Asia-Pacific Summit in Vietnam, will serve as a reminder of his strong dislike for multilateral free trade deals. The first one he tore up when he came into office, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is still alive. Signatories, in fact, may use the summit in Da Nang to announce its implementation with or without the United States. Just how has the region recalibrated in the past year? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Trump in China. With us from New York, Michael Hirson, the Asia Director for the Eurasia Group. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Ralph Winnie of the Eurasian Business Coalition, which partners with Asian and former Soviet republics, is in Washington. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be on.
From Warwick in England, King Wong, who teaches marketing and innovation at Warwick University. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And here in the studio, Théo Clément, Junior Fellow at the University of Lyon's Institute for Far Eastern Studies.
Good evening.
Thanks for being with us. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Formal wear, please. Let's start at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. And at the official banquet, U.S. President Donald Trump introducing a video of his granddaughter Arabella singing in Mandarin. King Wong, how's her Mandarin?
My Mandarin is good.
No, her
I
Mandarin.
can understand.
Her Arabella's.
Her Mandarin.
Yeah.
Her Mandarin is also very impressive. I just watched that video from the beginning to the end, and I have to say it gets better and better as she went on.
What did you make of that? What were you thinking when you saw that was played at the official banquet?
Well, clearly, that certainly showed that President Trump was quite willing to show that he appreciates the culture of China. And he knew President Xi is very proud of the Chinese culture, as President Xi took President Trump to the Forbidden City as the first event after President Trump arrived Beijing. So there is that kind of mutual understanding of where they could agree.
Of where they could agree. So definitely the red carpet being rolled out. Michael Hirson, would you put that clip there on par with a few years back, what we had Australian Prime Minister of the time, Kevin Rudd, giving a speech in Mandarin? Would this be on par with it?
I think so. I think it's a shrewd move. And, President Trump, I think, values his personal relationship with President Xi, and that's what this video is about. And his family has developed a relationship as well with Chinese counterparts. So it's a smart move. It shows some humanity, and, it shows a respect for Chinese culture.
Michael, let's cut to the chase here. What has changed since April when Trump hosted Xi Jinping at his Florida mansion in Mar-a-Lago?
Well, some things have changed, but others really have not. The two key asks that President Trump has for China are still the same, and it's cooperation on North Korea and it's asking China to take deeper measures to correct this structural trade imbalance with the United States. And really, we've seen China make some progress in terms of cooperation on North Korea. On trade, to be honest, it hasn't been that much. And so that was really the ask for this visit. And, we actually are not in much of a different place on those two core issues.
All right, we're going to hear what Donald Trump had to say about trade in a moment. Just first, though, on the issue, Théo Clément, of North Korea, did he press hard enough?
No. Last year, this year in April, he didn't press enough when he met Xi Jinping at Mar-a-Lago already. But right now, he's being even softer on Xi Jinping.
On North Korea?
On the North Korean issue, he's being even softer on Xi Jinping because he's not pressuring the Chinese. I have to say that I don't blame him because from my perspective, the sanction and the pressure approach on North Korea has proven best case scenario counterproductive, worst case scenario actually very dangerous.
But we have the U.S. Senate, which is perhaps going to tighten the screws, or it's passed a bill that similar to the language we have in a House bill on tightening the screws on Chinese banks that do business with North Korea.
Yes, but the U.S. itself does not have enough leverage on the Chinese economy and on North Korea directly to actually change things when it comes to the nuclear program in the DPRK. China can, but the Chinese government itself might not have the willingness or the ability to actually pressure North Korea.
So the U.S. doesn't have much leverage on China when it comes to North Korea. Ralph Winnie, you agree?
No, I disagree. I think Trump is going to continue to ramp up the rhetoric. And as long as the Chinese believe that Trump is very serious, that it's unacceptable for the North Korean regime to maintain a nuclear weapons program, they're going to continue to exert the pressure on the North Korean government to stand down. It all comes down to perception. If the Chinese and the Russians, for that matter, believe that Trump is serious about taking out the North Korean government, they will feel it's in their interest to ensure that the North Koreans stand down for the maintenance of control, orders, and economic and political stability in the region.
But do you think that with Trump being in Beijing and basically not saying anything to the Chinese about North Korea, that's going to convince the Chinese to exert more pressure on the DPRK?
I think the more that he engages with them on the personal level, as your previous guest discussed, Arabella singing Chinese songs and promoting that intense personal relationship that he and his family have with the region, it's going to lead at some point to results happening. As we've already seen, there is a major trade deal with a state of West Virginia as part of this $250 billion package. As far as North Korea is concerned, again, Trump has been very complimentary of the Chinese involvement in trying to deal with the situation, but that's not going to stop him from ramping up the rhetoric when he gets back home to ensure that the Chinese and the Russians, for that matter, believe that he is serious about his intentions.
Michael Herson, you agree?
Well, I sort of agree and disagree with both of your guests. I think that on the one hand, it is true that President Trump is going to ratchet up the pressure on China. But on the other hand, I'm inclined to agree that the U.S. does have limited leverage, and China believes that it has limited leverage over North Korea. Really where Beijing's red line is, Beijing is willing to incrementally tighten the pressure. And in fact, they've done that in recent months, thanks to the pressure from the Trump administration. But Beijing does not want to go so far as to trigger the collapse of the North Korean regime. They fear the instability that would ensue from that. And that's the line they're walking. And really, from the U.S. perspective, the only way you're going to bring Kim Jong-un and North Korea to the negotiating table is with maximum pressure. And Beijing, I don't think, is willing to go there.
All right. There wasn't, by the way, just singing at the official banquet. There were also toasts.
45 years ago, Nixon visited China. The visit unlocked the door to relations between China and the U.S. As he rightly pointed out before leaving, it was the week that changed the world. Since then, thanks to the joint efforts of several generations of leaders and our people, historic progress has been made, and we have benefited our two countries and indeed changed the world.
Now, talk of Richard Nixon's 1972 breakthrough visit to China has the U.S.'s traditional allies breaking into cold sweats, according to Wall Street Journal columnist Andrew Brown, who argues that the likes of Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and others fear the birth of a new chapter in relations where the Beijing-Washington axis basically dwarfs all else. He writes, such diplomacy would essentially create a G2, the U.S. and China, carving up the globe between them. King Wong, are we headed towards a G2?
Well, yeah, there are all sorts of scary theories around that, and China's rise to economic and political power is unstoppable. And I think that comes to consensus now. But people also know that China has this preference for collaboration, has the preference for, if you like, win-win rather than being confrontational. Therefore, I think it's up to the other countries to decide whether they want to join the club, whether they wanted to be collaborative. Then I think that is the option.
But the theory here,
choose.
But the fear among these countries, like Japan, like South Korea, and some of the smaller nations even, is that once Washington and Beijing agree on stuff, well, they basically have to follow the orders of the concept of this G2. Are we any closer to that?
I wouldn't agree with that. I think the country, the world now is becoming very multi-dimensional, if you like, that no one country should really think that way. And the regional stability and that's why I think President Xi came up with the Belt and Road Initiative, indicating that every country, whether it's big or small, should matter to this world balance. And to come back to the G2, if you like, hypothesis, people know very well this is not going to be like Britain and the UK, or Britain and the US, perhaps. That it's never going to be such a strong bond between two countries with such a different priorities, if you like, and different situations to deal with. The best they could do is to be more collaborative than confrontational, and to keep that. I think it's very important that two giants, if you like, are actually in a slightly better relationship than in not. So I think that's why President Xi actually took President Trump to the Forbidden City, where actually showed him 3 palaces, which all has the name of harmony of some kind. So I think this is more of saying, let's put aside the differences and try to work on the commonalities.
Michael Herson, are you reassured from what you just heard by King Wong?
Well, I think she's right in that we are headed for a multipolar world, and in fact, we're there already. Certainly, that's how China views the world right now, and they view that as an opportunity as the U.S. steps back from its more expansive role multilaterally and in the international system. She sees that as an opening for China to step forward. But look, I think we're very far away from a G2. I don't think either country feels that it's in their interest to create a G2, and certainly there's not enough trust between the two sides. I mean, behind the personal affinity that we've seen in this visit between President Trump and President Xi, there are some deep underlying issues, particularly on trade and the intersection of trade, technology, and national security that are really moving to the center of the relationship. So I don't think other countries need to worry about a G2. They might need to worry about the uncertainty created from the U.S. stepping back from its global role. But G2, we are not close to seeing.
We're going to pay more attention to trade when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.
Reporters Plus, presented by Mark Owen.
In the Western world, the life cycle of clothing shrinks with every passing year, down now to just a few months. we're dumping more and more in street corner containers. But what then becomes of those clothes? Our unprecedented report follows their incredible journey across Europe and Africa in order to understand the enormity of a business that generates more than 5 billion euros a year.
Reporters Plus on France 24 and France24.com.
With a 6.6% growth in 2016, the Republic of Guinea is taking off thanks to its mining resources, its hydraulic and agricultural potential, its youth, and its tertiary sector. In order to present its national plan for social and economic development and over 50 projects for its inclusive and sustainable growth, Guinea welcomes all its partners to Paris on November 16th and 17th.
Welcome back. Before we resume the France 24 debate, our top story with Laura Cellier at the top of the hour. It's been a big day of surprises in Saudi Arabia. First, there was the announcement that and the new Crown Prince's anti-corruption swoop had widened the number of arrests topping 200. Then, news that Riyadh and since then Kuwait have ordered all their citizens to leave Lebanon in the wake of the shock resignation announced from Saudi Arabian soil by Lebanon's Prime Minister Saad Hariri, Hariri's own future party, calling on him to return home, fueling speculation in pro-Hezbollah media that Hariri may be detained against his own will in Riyadh. Now comes news that France's president has added an unannounced 2-hour stopover in Saudi Arabia to his tour of the UAE. Emmanuel Macron, whose ambassador, met with Hariri in Saudi Arabia earlier in the day.
Informal contact has been established at this stage, which does not involve official communication for now. No request has been made to this effect. My wish is that all Lebanese politicians can live freely in Lebanon.
First the Saudis, then the Kuwaitis ordering their citizens to leave Lebanon. It's something that we asked Nabi Boulos of the Los Angeles Times to comment on. He's in Beirut.
Well, it seems that this situation now is becoming more dire with regards to economic penalties of this crisis. So the sense here from people that I've spoken to is that Saudi Arabia will not actually be attacking Beirut with any kind of bombs or things of that nature, but that the costs of this will be economic. The intention is to basically prevent the incoming Gulf money into the country and to also, I guess, remove their concerns or their financial institutions from the area here. So this is actually quite dire, of course, because Lebanon is already in a very precarious economic situation right now, and it could really use the money, for sure. Of course, I mean, the Kuwait joining in will also probably mean that the Gulf will be joining in, and other, and the UAE and other countries as well. So there's a fear this will have a snowball effect right now.
And it's all coming as the 32-year-old Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, consolidates his power with that house cleaning, that anti-corruption crackdown, as he calls it, where more than 200 have been arrested. What are the thoughts on MBS where you are?
Well, of course, over here, there's a real sense that MBS has actually overstepped his boundaries. Yes, it's true that Saad al-Hariri has had a long relationship with the Saudi government. I mean, of course, he's also a Saudi citizen. And it's true that his company, or I should say his companies like Saudi Oger and others, have benefited from Saudi largesse. But the feeling is now that this is actually putting Lebanon in danger. Now this is destabilizing the country at a time when it doesn't really need it. Don't forget, Lebanon is also hosting approximately 2 million Syrian refugees. I mean, what will happen to them? We're talking about a country that is already suffering from a massive environmental crisis with the trash bag situation where the government is unable to collect the trash, a country whose infrastructure is already burdened by a massive influx of refugees, a situation where the political parties have actually, for a change now, finally found something to unite on. Their resentment of the Saudi move, because they fear for the stability in the country, and that's the way it's being seen. MBS is being seen now as a destabilizing force.
And one final question for you, Nabi. The thoughts, the hopes when it comes to that lightning visit by France's president that's been added to his tour of the UAE?
Well, this has been part of a diplomatic push by Beirut to recruit foreign countries to secure the release of Hariri. So we've seen them reach out to France, obviously, as we have seen with Pierre Macron going there. But also we've seen it reach out supposedly to Jordan and a few other countries in the region. And I mean, right now, this actually speaks to the desperation of the move. I mean, right now, politicians here in this country want Hariri back as soon as possible so they can figure out what to do. Don't forget, the government is essentially paralyzed until he returns. His resignation has not been accepted by the president, and even members of his own political party are saying that nothing can happen unless he returns.
Nabi Boulos of the Los Angeles Times. More with Laura Cellier at the top of the hour. Time now again for the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. Donald Trump wrapping up 36 hours in Beijing before heading to the APEC summit, the Asia-Pacific summit that's taking place in Vietnam. We're looking at Trump in Asia with Michael Herson, the Asia director of the Eurasia Group. And also he's in New York, in Washington. Ralph Winnie of the Eurasian Business Coalition, which partners with Asian and former Soviet republics. From Warwick, England, King Wang, who teaches marketing and innovation at Warwick University. And here in the studio, Théo Clément, junior fellow at the University of Lyon's Institute for Far Eastern Studies. Welcome back to all of you. Listen to the gasps and awkward laughs, perhaps. Listen carefully when Donald Trump characterizes his country's trade deficit with China.
It is a very one-sided and unfair one, but I don't blame China. After all, who can blame a country for being able to take advantage of another country for the benefit of its citizens? I give China great credit. But in actuality, I do blame past administrations for allowing this out-of-control trade deficit to take place and to grow. We have to fix this because it just doesn't work for our great American companies, and it doesn't work for our great American workers.
Ralph Winnie, is it okay to point the finger at predecessors when you're on foreign soil?
Well, I think the challenge when you're dealing with Trump is for people to recognize he's not a politician, he's not a diplomat, he's a businessman. And he looks at it from the perspective of trying to craft the right deal. And he's looking at these politicians that have negotiated deals for us in the past, and he said, it's not worked. The other side has been able to take advantage because they have been more skilled and creative in terms of getting the best deal to benefit the citizens of China.
But what's he going to get? What's he going to get out of this? How are the Chinese going to take it when they see him pointing the finger at other politicians in the United States?
Well, what he's focusing on is results. If you look at this two-way commitment that he's talking about, if you look at the state of West Virginia, now they were the biggest recipient of the $250 billion of investments that were signed during President Trump's visit to China. And I'm specifically referring to China Energy Investment Corporation, which is planning to invest $83 billion in shale gas development and chemical manufacturing projects in the state of West Virginia over the next 2 decades. And this is a memo of understanding that marks the first step in a series of commitments that this Chinese company expects to make in West Virginia, including power generation, chemical manufacturing, and underground storage of natural gas liquid derivatives. So Trump is focused on the deal. and that's what he's trying to get out of China to make sure that the U.S. benefits from their trade and engagement with the United States.
Michael Herson, do you take Trump at his word that he's just looking out for, quote, the great American workers?
Well, I think that's his objective, but I think that the message was a bit garbled. I think what the president was saying is sort of, cheat us once, shame on you. Cheat us twice, shame on us for not pushing back. The problem is that to the Chinese, it sounds like he's absolving them somewhat of blame. And so I think what the real issue here is that although this sounds like very friendly talk, it's a missed opportunity to bridge some of the gap on these trade issues. What President Trump has said is, look, for this visit, the deliverables are going to be these contract signings like we've seen, the one in West Virginia and a bunch of others. But this is small ball for us. We want to really have China take action on these structural measures in China, like market access, that are responsible for the trade deficit. The problem is that was a private message that the president delivered, and he didn't use this visit, which the Chinese really wanted to go well, and make President Xi look good, as the action-forcing event to make progress on those issues. So what happens next? Well, as he said, cheat us twice, shame on us. He's left the door open for his trade officials to take tougher trade actions against China in coming months, and we've seen a number of those waiting in the wings. So I think, despite the pleasant talk on this visit, we are looking for increased trade frictions over the next 6 to 9 months.
Increased trade frictions. King Wang, what does a foreign leader do when they go to China? If you want there to be more foreign investors, you have to build confidence. To build confidence, you have to have strong rule of law. So when they hear a lecture on human rights, does that help or hurt the cause in terms of getting those foreign investors to come?
Can I just go back a little bit to the question before about whether the President Trump's remarks on his predecessors' inability to address the trade deficit problem, and how would that be perceived by the Chinese leaders? I still remember towards the end of President Obama's term, and he had indeed deviated from the economic and issues and focused quite a lot on the East China Sea situation. And the fact we have to remember, the Chinese leaders are always very pragmatic. Pragmatism has been core to the Chinese policies over the past 30 years. So now they're meeting somebody who's equally pragmatic in some way. So it's probably going to find that a bit of relief, sigh of relief that President Trump now is also more of a businessman than a politician, and is focusing on what he thinks is important, and that happens to be what the Chinese leaders think is important.
Yeah, but how do businessmen feel about it? Because they want their politicians to be the referees, right? The ones who make sure that the rules are applied.
Yeah, I agree. But if you look at the facts, in fact, the people, I guess, in America who are probably more pro the Sino-America relationships to be a better one are probably the businessmen more than the politicians. I may be wrong there. So clearly they are also, the business people are also pragmatic. Of course, they wanted the law, they wanted the legislations. And I think that's the area that I think that China is trying within their ability to try to address that issue, and whether that is satisfactory. I think, obviously, I think the figures will show how much investment has been, foreign direct investment has been flowing into China, and how much that have helped China to develop over the past 30 years. More so, perhaps, than to some other emerging countries like Brazil and India. So it is a difficult, it's a complex issue there to
It's a complex issue, and we have, as we see, a Xi Jinping whose power is growing. He's now the most powerful after the recent Chinese Communist Party Congress, the most powerful Chinese leader since Mao. Having lived Théo Clément 4 years in China, we had earlier Donald Trump, who didn't take questions at that press briefing, which means there were none of those awkward questions about human rights and such. Is that a good thing?
Well, I don't think it's a good idea to come to China and to go straight to the point and talk about human rights. It's not very constructive. And when you are the leader of the US and you're trying to achieve something and to make a diplomatic move towards the Chinese, discussing human rights might feel a bit frustrating for the counterpart. So I don't think it's a good idea in general and with the Chinese in particular. But the thing is that Trump did not mention human rights in China, but he didn't mention anything, basically. He just had this very nice dinner at the Forbidden City, discussed with his personal best friend, Xi Jinping, but we haven't seen him talking with the Chinese on substantial issues like trade and North Korea and the South China Sea at all. So it's a bit, I'm feeling a bit mixed about the objective and the results of Trump's visit to Beijing, because basically he hasn't achieved nothing except a better personal relation with Xi Jinping.
Of course, his Asia trip is not over. On Friday, Donald Trump will be in Da Nang, where the 1965 deployment of U.S. Marines signaled for many the start of the Vietnam War. Today, it's home to a luxury resort populated, by the way, by wealthy Chinese in a large part. And it's welcoming an APEC summit where there are those who apprehend the change in Washington and those who seem to embrace it.
America was the first victim of globalization. And that is why Trump is trying to rule them back and said America first. And if you take a look at it, actually, this is what happened.
Michael Herson, that sounds like an endorsement there from the president of the Philippines.
Of endorsement of the America First policy?
Yeah.
Well, I think, different countries have their own policies in terms of trade, and some are, taking a more protectionist stance. But I think you're right. I mean, every country in the region is trying to figure out what this new ballgame looks like for the U.S., where you have President Trump, as you said in your introduction, much less inclined to sign multilateral trade agreements and pulling out of TPP. So it's created some uncertainty. It's created a window, I think, for China in particular to step in and to try to show that it's leading the trade agenda in the region. But it's certainly scrambled the deck in terms of how the trade relationships are going to be working at this APEC meeting.
So the U.S. has left the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's basically one of the first things he did when he came to office was rip it up, Michael. But let me ask you, we have the trade ministers from those countries that have signed on who are meeting as we speak in Da Nang, and they may announce that they're still going forward with it. Your thoughts on that?
I think that's right. I mean, on the one hand, these countries see the value of the negotiations that have taken place in this framework. And on the other hand, several of them are still hoping that the U.S. might join, either if President Trump were to change his views on trade, perhaps renegotiate some aspects of the agreement, but really wait for the next U.S. administration to come along. And certainly Japan, I would put most firmly in that camp. Japan has been resisting U.S. efforts to enter into bilateral trade negotiations because they want to keep that pressure up on the U.S. to eventually rejoin TPP.
Ralph Winnie, if TPP goes forward, will there be the sense that the globalization continues, free trade deals, multilateral deals continue with or without the United States, and that, well, the train is leaving without the U.S.?
Well, it all comes down to what Trump is able to accomplish one-on-one with different countries. If Trump produces business deals that are going to benefit the American people, then at the end of the day, that's what the focus is going to be. But if
and
he
you
fails,
prefer a world where there's lots of
out.
one-on-one bilateral trade deals than big multilateral ones?
It really depends on the situation that you're in. I think right now the belief was that the Trans-Pacific Partnership was not going to benefit the United States. Certainly that's why Trump was elected, because people in Middle America felt that their interests weren't going to be protected, expanded, or their businesses weren't going to grow if the U.S. joined the TPP. So right now, Trump's obligation to the American people is to provide jobs and economic security. And if he's able to bring in business from different countries, like he started with China, then that's going to be the defining factor, regardless of what your personal belief is about multinationalism or globalization. I think right now Trump's focus is on an America First policy, just like China's focus has been on a China First policy, which is why the U.S. and China have had this trade imbalance.
The U.S., of course, is Théo Clément.
Yeah, I have got one question for Ralph. And how do you think that people in the U.S., people who voted for Trump, are going to react when they hear their president saying that China's not responsible for the structural trade deficit with China?
I think people are going to look at their pocketbooks and they're going to reflect on, has their economic situation improved, regardless of whatever they hear Trump saying. They're going to look and demand results. As a deal maker, as a businessman, that's what Trump's strategy is to provide results. If he does not provide the results that people are looking for, if their economic livelihood does not improve, then he will take it on the chin.
Théo Clément, would you say the United States' clout in the region is growing, diminishing when you compare to 1 year ago?
It's still very hard to tell because we still don't know what Trump's strategy towards the region is. So I wouldn't say it's pretty much the same, but the uncertainty, the degree of uncertainty is much higher than it used to be. So basically, the influence of the US could definitely decrease in the coming month, depending on China is able to take the lead from the US, or if Donald Trump and the Trump administration is able to develop a more efficient diplomacy and strategy, and a more coherent and a more efficient strategy towards the region.
King Wong, I want your reaction to something Theo said a little earlier about how he's a bit frustrated that, well, from Trump we didn't get much beyond platitudes during this visit to Beijing. Previous U.S. presidents have, sat down with students, visited business leaders, been a bit more, there's been a bit more exchanges. Your thoughts on that in terms of, well, we don't really know, he hasn't shown his cards yet, and this heightened sense of uncertainty?
Yes. And clearly, President Trump has not demonstrated so far a lot of vision. I feel like he's just doing what he thinks immediately going to help him. Now, I don't want to comment on why that is the case, or how the internal politics have affected the way he sees his role. But clearly from the outside, people outside America, people would probably perceive that to be, to be less globally minded and more of an introvert rather than external. Try to do some more strategic initiatives to help America in terms of stay as the strong global power. And that has left a gap, I think, for the Chinese leaders, who are actually becoming stronger and become more visionary, I would say, because the dream is within the rich now, as they see it. So I think that's going to be a challenge for President Trump to come up with something which is visionary, which helps not just America's country itself, but also help the world in terms of balancing of power.
King Wong, I want to thank you for joining us from Warwick University. I want to thank Michael Herson in New York, Ralph Winnie in Washington, Théo Clément. Stay with us. Media Watch is next.
Thank you.
And we say hello to James Creedon.
Hi, Francois. So the social media angle, I suppose, is that Trump has been tweeting in China. That's
tweeting.
This is news now, of course, when the president tweets. But anyway, if he had stayed off Twitter in China, which is, of course, for the vast majority of the population unavailable, like Facebook, etc., they have their own equivalent social networks, Weibo, etc. But if he had stayed off Twitter, it could have been perceived as him being silenced by Chinese censorship. It has been getting quite a lot of reaction. The White House even officially saying that Trump would tweet as much as he wanted from China. I think there was also the China's vice foreign minister who spoke about this, telling reporters that we take everything into account on receiving foreign heads of state, so you should have no reservations about Mr. Trump's ability to keep in touch with the outside. So, of course, you can see quite a number of tweets, all very glowing. He even changed the backdrop to his Twitter account to that. So it's all very Diplo Twitter friendly.
Enough to encourage the Chinese to get on Twitter?
Probably not for now, but this has also coincided with the Twitter fully rolling out its 280
That's right, its first 240 character tweets were from
That's right, except for Chinese tweets in Chinese, even though there aren't that many of them, in Korean and in Japanese, because the characters allow you to say more anyway in those languages. But you see, he has in the past tweeted very disparaging things about China, so maybe the Chinese could have taken a harsher attitude, but diplomatically speaking, it might not have been a very good idea.
Théo Clément, how hard is it to tweet from China?
When I used to live in China, I didn't have Twitter, so it's actually not so hard. You just have to buy this VPN, virtual private network, to circumvent the censorship.
Exactly. So many criticize this sort of a two-tier system where the masses don't get to tweet. Maybe they don't even want to anyway. They have alternatives, right? But if you do have a VPN, you can get around it. And then, for example, Xinhua, the state broadcaster, uses Twitter as well to promote its articles, which gets accusations of double standards because, well, it is a double standard, I suppose. You also had Human Rights Watch speaking out, saying if President Trump is able to tweet from China, it's because he enjoys privileges President Xi systematically denies to people across that country. So there are quite a few angles to this story, but we did get, I think, was it the first 280 character tweet?
That's right.
From China. So it's all very lovely.
First one from the president.
That's right. And so then you had people being very satirical. Do you remember the whole China motif? China, 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 because it came up a lot in the election campaign. So we have tweets about the walls and what. And there were a few cartoons as well. I don't know if we have much time, but they're going up on social media too. The wall quite obviously made it into one or two cartoons, not quite the same wall, but there you go. And he's, people were anticipating him being very bullish. In some respects, he has been. There have been some warnings to North Korea and whatnot, but he's all things told, it's been a very warm and amicable visit, certainly in terms of the images and the tweets, if not the cartoons. But there you go. We'll have to see how that particular kettle of fish or pram of baby goes.
Oh dear.
Ahead.
Okay.
It's not the first time that's been done. The infantilizing
with the nuclear button.
Right.
All right. James Crean, many thanks for that. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.